Aquilo, Season 4, Chapter 11, A Date with Patience. Patience, the virtue, not the man, is something that I am clearly capable of. While I can, under the correct circumstances, be short-fused, on any normal day, I don't mind waiting however long I need to, if it'll get me the results I want. One could say that without patience, it is impossible to become a cook, or at least a decent one. The virtue is indispensable for anyone who needs to wait for a cake to bake, only to then wait for it to cool. Not rushing through steps is key to achieving the heights of culinary achievement. Pour a sauce without it reducing enough and you have a runny mess instead of a rich cream. Ice sponge while it's even a little warm and you risk melting your buttercream into a puddle. Marinades need time and laminated pastries need to chill. Sure, there are shortcuts, but they often result in a lesser product. With that in mind, I think it becomes easy to accept that I would sit on a park bench for over 3 hours waiting for someone who did not show up. What I didn't account for, however, is that my patience would drag me deep enough into the night that the weirdness of Aquilo Border Park would manifest itself. And with it, patience. Not the virtue, but the man. "Are you sure you should be alone on a night like this?" he asked, having snuck up right behind my bench. He's a creepy enough guy on his own. Average build and average size, with average features and an average height. However, he's dressed completely in white and has skin the color of the moon's reflection in a puddle. He manages to be forgettable, yet burn himself into my memories. He's Aquilo strange, with an icing of normalcy that makes him stand out even within that rarefied category. I manage not to jump or to scream. I don't even squeak at the surprise of his words. However, my back tenses enough to be noticed, and he apologizes for it. "I'm sorry," he says, his voice flat. "I didn't mean to startle you, but I think that just puts weight behind my point." I look up over my shoulder, pulling my purse against me in the process. He's looking down, his lips pulled back into a thin, unenthusiastic smile. His hands are stuffed into the pockets of his hoodie and his shoulders are hunched, almost as if a chill was running down his back. Which is that it's not safe to be alone tonight. I'm not supposed to be alone. I say it like he's to blame for my failed date. "Were you supposed to be with him?" He nods his head in the direction Ophelia and Gulliver walk down. I feel a sting in my gut, and despite myself, I look down the street. I can still see them there, long after they're gone. Gulliver laughing and Ophelia holding his arm. But the sting isn't from thinking about him. What stabs me is the whole picture of it. Or even more than that. It bleeds off the frame and into the gallery, infecting neighboring paintings and images. It's how Ophelia has so many things I want, but also how Cindy has the man I used to love, and how I almost had what they have, but it slipped away from me. No, I had other plans. I stop short of telling him all the details, keeping a finger on the leaking crack of that dam. He takes a few steps around the bench and slowly lowers himself to sit next to me, keeping a polite distance from the strange, lonely woman. His hands slip out of his pockets, and leaning forward, he rubs them together, either for warmth or to facilitate his thinking. "But you are thinking about them, aren't you?" That sounds like a 5-course meal of none of your business, doesn't it? It's hard, but I try to keep my tone light. I don't want this weird stranger to be offended, just in case he's more dangerous than he appears. But also, I'm not in the mood to spill my worries on the lap of whatever weirdo gets curious. His fingers spread above his knees for a second, stretching to their limit before he wraps them around his thighs. Right. He looks a little nervous. What is it they say about wild animals? They're more afraid of you than you are of them? Remember what I said about being generous with your time? Maybe don't take it so much as a compliment. What kind of a weird, backhanded comment is that? I think I should be insulted, but it's a muddled kind of jab. Was I just stung by a bee or by a vaccine? You did say you were just stating facts. A tremor travels through his body as his cheeks pull his lips further back. Is that a laugh? Is that how Patience experiences mirth? I do not like it. I did, and I was. It was a warning, if it was anything at all. For a long while after moving to Aquilo, I carried a fillet knife in my purse. It's not a big blade, maybe 8 inches long, and it's certainly not a wide blade. But it is razor sharp, the better to remove skin from flesh without leaving any laceration marks. This is what I use to prepare fish for sushi. I got into the habit out of fear. There were a lot of dead women in Aquilo back then, and I endeavored not to join them. Tonight, I wish I'd kept the habit up, or found another self-defense weapon to have on my person. Patience's hands find their way back into his hoodie pockets, and his eyes find the Italian restaurant. Ever been? He nods his head toward the place. Lorenzo's. That's the name, but you have to look past the bright neon pizza and above the backlit Italian restaurant sign. Until these two things are shut off for the night, the word Lorenzo might as well be invisible. And that's why everyone calls it the Italian restaurant. It's the only one in town, and most wouldn't know what else to call it. I can make my own pasta and pizza, I say, keeping as much disdain out of my voice as I can. Not even out of professional curiosity? It's been there a while. 2 generations. Can't be that bad. Have you? He shakes his head slowly, a quiet disappointment in the gesture. Sometimes I sit here and watch people walk in and out, and I smell the air, the roasting garlic and baking crusts, the acidic tomato aroma and that aggressive yet alluring stink of the Parmesan and Romano. I hoped you could tell me about it. Why don't you just go and have some? I ask. It looks fancy, but I hear the prices are decent. I mean, if Gulliver can afford to take Ophelia, it can't be that cripplingly expensive. Patience gives me the side eye, making me think that I may have said something wrong. I'm quick to realize, though, that it's how I said it that matters. While he was talking of enticing smells, I served him bitterness. You resent her. The words are as flat as his vanishing smile. Only the most generous observer would say that I'm warming up to Patience. His demeanor is off-putting, and I still can't slice between his words being threats or casual observations. Gulliver deserves better, I say, embracing the bitterness completely. And that makes Patience laugh. There's mirth in it, but only in the same way there's salt in saltwater taffy. It's an ingredient only included because it contrasts with everything else, necessary to outline that unique flavor profile, but otherwise completely out of place. The main ingredient in Patience's laugh isn't joy, it's sadness. He's neither laughing at me or with me, he's laughing at and with the situation. Does he deserve someone like you? He asks. He keeps a little grin from his bout of laughter, a souvenir to display. Not me, just someone better. Whatever it was Patience has been fishing for, he's finally got it. After waiting for hours, perhaps days, there's a bite, and now he can reel his catch in. He frowns and leans farther over his knees, but just like that first night we met, he twists his upper body to face me. He reminds me of my dad when I first came back from a bar, 2 years before I should have been legally allowed to. That strange mixture of worry and annoyance, all baked in an anger-shaped mold. If you don't want him, Miriam, what is it you do want? I'm going to blame the parental attitude Patience is giving me and the fact that he looks decades older with that facial expression for why I spill my guts so quickly and without contest. I want what they have, what Ophelia has. I'm jealous. The confession slips out of me like a fried egg off a Teflon pan, but it does little to make me feel better. No weight is lifted from my shoulders, and no clarity descends upon me like manna from heaven. Patience, however, looks like he's just tasted the delicious smooth burn of a well-aged whiskey. I've seen men chew on a perfectly cooked steak, butter gleaming on the crispy surface of every bite, and express the same bliss. Envy, he says, a long breath escaping his nose over the course of several seconds. Envy is an ugly thing, Miriam. It's a worm that lives in your heart. It grows fat on the things it feeds you. Your wants are what attracts it and give it the strength to burrow into you. Patience points to his own chest, right on the breastbone, but I can see he's talking about me, that I'm the victim in his pantomime. It can't be sated, though. It'll keep eating, but once it grows fat enough, it doesn't stop to hunger. It simply moves its appetite to a new meal. One day, it's feasting on being jealous of another's wealth. The next, it's nibbling on covetous desires for a relationship not its own. His gray eyes don't budge. Instead, they hang, unblinking for an impossibly long time, demanding that I acknowledge what Patience is saying. I'm not shopping around for a therapist, I reply with a tremble to my voice, forcing humor into a humorless situation. But you make a convincing pitch. It works, I think. Patience goes back to his tight smile and closes his eyes, rocking his body back and forth as he quietly laughs. It's late, Miriam, he says when he recovers, and it's not a safe night. Go home. As if to make sure I heed his warning and obey his order, Patience pulls himself up from the bench, calmly walking back behind me to wait until I do the same. I'm a few steps on my way, having cast a couple of looks back to see the white-clad young man as he supervises my return home when he calls out. You know, he says, quiet but loud enough that I hear him. You are a lot like her. Doris, that is. She, too, was funny. Getting the gears of the Aquilo turning again was an extra level of demanding today. The previous evening had been late, and the night was light on sleep. Having Stefan on my couch is already a burden I won't admit to in public, but an invasion of my private space that I would not endure. Then there's the whereabouts of Vicky that require regular checks of my phone in the hope of seeing a text message that never came. All of that was but the sour and bitter atop the ever-present aftertaste left by my conversation with Patience. To top it all, I had to replenish my pastry display from scratch. I took some shortcuts, baking batch after batch of cookies. It was tempting to give biscotti another go, but I shied away from that, opting instead for more donuts. In the end, the display wasn't my proudest achievement. No food critic would walk into the Aquilo this day and be blown away. I could expect to perhaps hit a mark of satisfactory at best. I have no worry about the quality of my work, but the variety and ambition is missing. And those are two things I pride myself with. Who's Patience? Annabelle asks, again choosing gossip over studies and slamming her books shut. The gang is all here. Annabelle was studying, until she wasn't anymore, and Olivia is sampling every single caramelized apple donut available. That's what I want to know, I say, my comment directed at Olivia. She pulls at a donut held between her thumb and index fingers, ripping it between her teeth as she does so. It's an inelegant gesture that, coupled with a distant gaze towards the ceiling, gives her the airs of a cooking competition judge. Of course, these are her apples, lovingly incorporated into my fried pastry, so she will scrutinize every detail of the flavor and texture. And how would I know that, dear? I never stop by the border park at night, not if I can help it. It's a rainy day out, and that should have a somewhat negative impact on foot traffic to the cafe, but quite the opposite is happening. The strong wind and gray weather is motivating people to seek refuge in my dry establishment and enjoy a warm cup of whatever strikes their fancy. He talks like he knew Doris pretty damn well. Olivia muses, almost as if trying to decide something. Knowing Doris and knowing everything that Doris knew are not exactly the same thing. Besides, what makes you think he's telling the truth? Further down the counter, the clicking and clacking of spoon on cup, the telltale song of a beverage being stirred. I've never heard of anyone with that name in Aiguilo. Helen Edna, notary public, adds her 2 cents to the conversation. But I know that Doris did spend a lot of time in Aiguilo Border Park, and there were people there she did not like to talk about. Olivia and Helen are 2 of my 3 experts when it comes to Doris. They're 2/3 of the triumvirate of knowledge about my great-grandaunt. Both knew Doris while she still lived, and each was privy to an aspect of her life that the public remained unaware of. The other third is Gulliver, who is noticeable only by his absence this morning. I want to imagine he had to go back to Montreal, or there was another delivery that required him to leave town. In the back of my mind, however, I know that his truck is probably still parked up the street, and that knowledge gnaws at me. I can almost feel it, the worm that lives in your heart and grows fat on the things it feeds. The envy that pushes at my chest like a pressure building up from within. I would have liked to have Gulliver here. His perspective would have been precious. He knew Doris from a completely unique angle. Where Olivia and Helen were friends of Doris, Gulliver was the recipient of her goodwill and help. It remains a mystery still what it is she did for him, but there's no denying that it completely changed the course of his life. Even today, I wouldn't want to stand between Gulliver and his memory of Doris. "And you think he's somehow linked to the death of Nancy?" Annabelle asks, bringing us back to our main topic of conversation. Suspicious guy who hangs out in the park at night targets me to have cryptic conversations about Doris? And he just so happens to show up after Nancy's murder? This is Aiguilo, and this town abhors a coincidence. This comment elicits a knowing nod out of Olivia, who further punctuates her acknowledgement with a sip of her coffee. Helen is more stoic, voicing neither agreement nor disagreement, preferring instead to push her cookies around her plate. Annabelle, however, "You think it's another demon," she states with barely restrained excitement. I don't often feel the adult when having these conversations in the cafe. I may be the owner and operator of the Aiguilo, but I've surrounded myself with people older than I and with more experience in, well, everything. Everything but cooking, of course. Annabelle is a different creature. With her, I feel leveled. We speak roughly the same language and have a lot of similar cultural touchstones. She's a contemporary, and our emotional responses parallel one another closely. Once in a while, though, she'll do something like this. We'll be having an adult conversation about the mysteries of this town, and she'll slip up, letting her curiosity and enthusiasm get the better of her. She may have lived here her whole life, but it's only recently that she's stepped into the deeper shadows of Aiguilo. "I'm sorry," she apologizes, picking up on our sudden collective silence. "A demon would be a terrible and scary thing, but is Patience a demon?" That last part comes out as a whisper, offered to us as she leans over the counter, half perched on her pile of books. She wants it to be a demon. Of course she does. She's never met one of those damn things, and she'll never know how close she came to being one of their victims. The Aiguilo has had more than its fair share of these creatures lurking around the building. "Honey," Olivia says, reaching into Helen's plate in an attempt to take one of her cookies. "I certainly hope he isn't. Right, Miriam?" "Right," I mumble, hesitating a little. I don't want him to be another demon. Nothing but pain and heartache comes from these things, but there is some evidence that he might be. My mind keeps going back to Nancy Tripoli's body, how her rib cage looked like it had been burrowed through from within. The handful of demons I've had the displeasure of meeting all killed in exotic, gruesome fashion. This would fit their particular methodology to a T. Yet, when I picture Patience in my head, the way he frets and moves, never completely sure of what to do with his hands, I don't see a demon. Besides, I know of far scarier things that lurk in the fog and shadows of Aiguilo. Thankfully, the door chimes come to my rescue. I can see in Annabelle's eyes that she wants us to dig deeper into this theory. This is her chance, perhaps, to catch up to the rest of us and share one of those experiences that bonded Olivia, Helen, and I. And Gulliver. "You're early," I call out to Stefan. I wipe my hands on my apron, more out of habit than because they're dirty. It also allows me to paw at the front pocket, checking that my spoon and notepads are where they should be. The cook's version of patting around for my phone. "I did what you said," he explains, looking more excited and anxious than I've ever seen him. The way he shifts his weight from one foot to the other, closing and opening his fists all the while, you'd think he was about to run a marathon. "You, want to sit down?" My offer falls on deaf ears. "I gave it some thought," he continues, tension in him reaching an almost tangible level. "I tried to figure out who would have any motive, means, or opportunity to kill Nancy." He's loud, almost shouting. Heads are starting to turn, looking in our direction as Stefan struggles to spit out what he has to say. "Opportunity, Miriam!" "Shh." I try to quiet him, lest the whole town hear him. There's nothing for it. He clearly had to work himself up to this. Thinking about Nancy's death would be painful enough on its own, but confessing whatever it is he's discovered looks like absolute torture. His hands are moist with sweat and the hair sticks to his forehead. "Someone had to have crossed her path to have opportunity, and the words fight him as he pushes them out. "And then I checked my messages from 2 weeks ago. My messages from Nancy." He reaches into his pocket, having a hell of a time taking his phone out. His fingers slip and he almost drops the damn thing to the ground, only catching it in the last moment. Fingerprints are not registering because of the moisture. He punches in his PIN before flipping the screen so it's inches from my eyes. The whole Aquilo Cafe is quiet now, having followed every word of the little drama unfolding for them to witness. They're all looking at me, waiting to drink in my reaction and layer their interpretation of that. I take the phone in my hands, unable to read anything while Stefan's shaking grip is in control. There it is, in a series of gray and blue speech bubbles. Nancy's messages in black letters and quick abbreviated words, while Stefan's are composed only of full, accurate sentences. Job interview with old man Hans. Something about help around his house. Good news. We all know he can pay. No problem. "I've got a theory," Stefan says as we get out of the car. It's Annabelle's car, or rather her mother's, which means we had to walk all the way back to Annabelle's home on the U.S. side of town and wait for her to secure consent to use the car in the first place. With the rain and all, you'd think that she would have invited us in, warm up and have a cup of tea. Instead, Stefan and I had to huddle under the carport and wait 15 minutes, all with little warmth and no explanation. Getting out of the Aquilo was no mean feat either. There was no way I was going to get away with closing it for yet another afternoon. Even if it was just for a few hours, I'd be jeopardizing my credibility as a business owner. Not that I'm exactly a superstar of the Aquilo Entrepreneur Association, but I'd like to stay clear of becoming the laughingstock. I managed, with no small amount of cajoling, to convince Olivia to take over. Stefan offered his salary for those hours, and I offered to pay her myself. Both propositions were met with derisive laughter. "Oh, honey," she said, popping another bite of donut in her mouth. "I don't need no money. What I need are hands. Strong, young hands to stick labels on bottles. Thousands and thousands of bottles." We got a sour end to that deal in the end. An entire day each of bottling and labeling in exchange for a few hours of Olivia taking care of the Aquilo. And somehow Annabelle got roped into this as well, even though she's not even an employee of the Aquilo. "A theory, you say?" I ask, holding out my hand to feel the raindrops hitting my palm. Judging by their behavior, my friends are not quite as poetically enthused by the seasonal drizzle as I am. Stefan is holding the lapels of his jacket up against his cheeks, while Annabelle is struggling with a bright pink floral print umbrella before stepping out of the driver's seat. I'm not exactly brimming with optimism for whatever theory Stefan might have. He's a smart boy, there's no denying that, and observant to a fault. But I've worked hard to shield him from the weirdness of the cafe and Aquilo. I've endeavored to put him right in the eye of the storm and never let the wind buffet him or the rainfall lash him. By virtue of that, he lacks the basic information necessary to come up with a workable theory. He's literally playing with half a deck of cards. He's driving nails without a hammer. I think Nancy got the job, he explains. And I think she's the one who introduced Helmut Hans to those non-fat half-calf Mocha Valencia. Explains why he ordered that drink the other day, and might explain why she wasn't home at my apartment for over a week. Okay, so maybe he can come up with a good theory. Instead of acknowledging anything, though, I look around the Hans property. When given Helmut Hans's biography, I built this specific image of what his home might be like. As one of the two wealthiest people in the area, I painted his home on the canvas of my mind's eye to resemble that of Julia and Gary Remington, an opulent stone-walled mansion crowning a breathtaking landscape of flower beds, statues, and copse of trees. Helmut Hans is a different kind of wealthy man. His home is a vast one-story house that can't decide whether to be a farmhouse or a ranch. Half is brick-walled and half is wooden boards. Windows abound, and off to the side is an attached garage with no less than 4 doors. The property looks vast, but without any particular care given to landscaping. An open white picket fence separates the property from the road, but otherwise it's all wild grass and shrubs. I like it, Annabelle says, having mastered her umbrella. The house, I mean. The theory, it has 2 holes. Which are? Stefan flips his jacket over his head as the rain intensifies. Well, for one thing, Nancy would have texted you to let you know she'd be gone, right? I shake my head, anticipating the answer. No, Stefan doesn't disappoint. She valued her freedom and independence above anything. Nancy didn't report to anyone. We walk under the porch, and Annabelle collapses her umbrella, while Stefan wipes at his jacket, trying to get as much water off its surface as possible. How did the 2 of you ever get along? The best she gets in response is a shrug, which is to be expected with Stefan when discussing personal matters. I wasn't sure about bringing Annabelle with us. It's hard to get Stefan to be comfortable with his private life already. Crowding him with too many people, especially people as direct as Annabelle, I don't want him to shut down. What's the second hole? He asks, his finger hovering over the doorbell. It's not so much a hole in the theory, Annabelle explains, shaking out her umbrella, so much as it is something you're not accounting for. How is Vicky Paramore ordering non-fat half-calf Mocha Valencias too? Unless you think she was also working with Nancy? Or it's a coincidence? Stefan seems to give the problem some serious thought. He gives me a look, trying to gauge my reaction to hearing Vicky's name. I give him nothing. Probably because there isn't much to give. Though, if I have to be honest, a large part of why I want to get to the bottom of the Nancy Tripoli story is because I'm worried for Vicky. I'm worried for every girl in Aquilo. Just as he looks like he might have an answer, Stefan pushes the button. Loud, echoing electronic bells fill the interior of the house, setting the windows shaking enough that they cast off some of the water beaded on their surface. It's a long toll that reverberates, filling a solid 10 seconds. Yet, nothing comes of it. A cold silence, accompanied by the dripping of rain off gutters and the howling of a cool wind, fill the time as we wait for Helmut Hans to answer the door. We show patience, giving the old man enough time to hobble his way from whatever portion of the house he's in, all the way to the front door. Just as I'm about to suggest Stefan give the doorbell another try, he pushes the button again. This time, as we wait, Annabelle pops her umbrella open again, stepping out from under the porch. I barely pay her any attention, trying instead to see through the windows. Apart from a lavish living room, one decorated with an abundance of horse statues, horse paintings, and horse photos, I'm not rewarded with anything of note. Maybe he's not home? Stefan ventures, a sliver of hope in his voice. And I find myself agreeing with the sentiment. He and I do have this in common. Neither of us likes to ring strangers' doorbells, especially to ask them strange questions. We share a shrug, turning around and expecting to see Annabelle already waiting in the car. Instead, her pink umbrella demands our attention from the far side of the garage, but she's no longer putting that much effort into keeping it over her head. Blonde hair darkens as it gets damp, then wet, and finally drenched under the pouring rain. Her umbrella nearly falls from her left hand as the right one holds open the side door to the garage. Like a damaged automaton, she turns her head back to face us. Eyes wide and unblinking, she wears a mask I've gotten far too accustomed to. It's the mask of shock and dread that first introduced me to Detective Lamore. It's the mask I saw reflected in the brass of my coffee machine that day the cops found a body behind the Aquilo Cafe. "Guys," she calls out, pulling the word into a plaintive cry. "I think I know where Nancy was killed." Aquilo is written by J.F. Dubeau and narrated and produced by me, Amy Frost. If you enjoyed this podcast and would like to hear more, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or your preferred podcast platform. Want to support the show? Buy us a coffee. Go to ko-fi.com/Aquilo to donate. Aquilo has a Patreon. Visit patreon.com/Aquilo for details. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram under the username Aquilo.